Hello and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday. This is Trevor, and today we're going to be talking about how to use a few tricks to be able to get your forms online and possibly even some order forms look a little bit more impressive and have a little more wow factor. So to get started, let's take a look at a couple examples. So this form right here is an Infusionsoft form, and the text in fact comes from Infusionsoft. We've just added a little bit of styling to make it look with the shadow and everything like that. You'll notice also the label for the fields are inside the box. The submit button's a little more fancy. And another example that you'll probably be more familiar with is the questions form down on the bottom of our webinar page. Has the first name, email, phone number, and questions. This is an Infusionsoft form as well. Now, before we get too far into how we built this and what's involved, when you're starting to work with code or have questions about it, it's nice to have a program that will allow you to more easily understand the code and find your way through it a bit. And one of the programs out there that is free is called Komodo Edit. And on your machine, if you don't want to download anything, you can use your notepad on a PC or TextEdit on a Mac and get the coding done that you need to. But again, it's not going to give you some of the added benefits and styling. So if, for example, you just go to your Google page and then type in Komodo, and it's spelled Komodo, and then edit, it should be the first thing that pops up, and you can go ahead and head to the site, and you'll see that some of the features I'm talking about color code different elements of the code, indent it for you, and make it a lot easier to read. So I'd recommend checking something like that out. And if we want to see a little bit about, for those who might already have a form up on their site that someone else built, and they just want to turn it into an Infusionsoft form, let's take a little bit of a back-end look as to what's included in a form and how can we make it become an Infusionsoft form. So on this one, for example, if we look up at our toolbar here, if you had installed what we talked about on our previous webinar, a little add-on here in Firefox that's free called Web Developer. It's going to give you the little tool I'm about to use. So we go under our form section and we want to display the form details. We can see here that we have something called a form action, which just provides us a web address or a location where, when the form is submitted, where should the data be sent. And so it has that set up for us there. Now, Infusionsoft needs to know two things about each field. One is the ID, and one is the name. In this case, they're the same, but Infusionsoft needs to know that to know where to put the data. So where do we get the form action, and how do we know those IDs? That is found in the form itself in Infusionsoft. So if, for example, we take a look at some of the code that we just copy out of the form, and in the campaign, for example, we can open up a form and see the specific code I'm talking about. The only thing to be aware of is once we change a form to be an Infusionsoft form from your site no longer determines the redirect location. Infusionsoft would do that. So if you have a certain web page already set up for where they should go after they submit the form, you'll need to make sure that the thank you page is set up to redirect to that link. So if we come into the code tab, getting back to our topic, we can see under the HTML code, it gives us our form action location, and it also provides for us under the first name section, for example, you'll see the ID and we have the name. And so you'll be able to use the form itself that you have in place in Infusionsoft to get that data. Now, that brings up a point that I need to clarify. If you have a form on your site, all that you have to do in Infusionsoft is build a form. That's the shell, basically. You don't have to worry about stylizing anything in Infusionsoft. You just simply have to match. If you're asking for first name, you need a first name field. If you're asking for email, you need an email field. If you're asking for questions in a text area like that, you'll need a custom field for questions that's set up as the type of text area. And so those little things you just need to match so your Infusionsoft form has those fields, and you'll be able to again get the ID of each to be able to turn your existing form into an Infusionsoft form. Now, taking another look ahead is how do we actually get the field label into the text box. I've already copied out the code into Komodo. This is again the Komodo edit, and you can see that right here I already have my form action, and it's all colorized so I can read this a little easier, indented, and now I have everything that I need for first name. And the first name I've already kind of laid out the example, but we'll talk about how the email was. This is actually what the first name had in place. In other words, what I'm talking about is it had a label section and an input section. I don't need the label section, in fact, when putting my actual label inside the text field. The label is for if you're going to obviously keep the value outside of the text box. It's telling the web browser where to display the name of that field. So if I remove the label and then I use a certain identifier, it will put it into my text box. And the identifier I'm talking about is something called placeholder. All you have to do is, if we take, for example, the email case, in my input section, I just need to put the word placeholder. And then, just like all of the others, I do the equal sign and then the open quote. And then now I can insert the text of what I want to be. I recommend starting with a space because that way your text is not directly up against the left side of your text box. So you have a space and then put in whatever you want them to enter, email, and then just end with a little quotation. And then at that point you could get rid of the label line, right? So now the placeholders will display that text just like this inside of the field. Now the question becomes, okay, if we've got that done and we've removed the label, we've inserted the placeholder and insert our value, how do we get it to be aligned like this? The first thing I would recommend is going over to Google and typing in HTML, which is the actual code language that we're working with, and we type in the word table. This brings up a site called W3 Schools, which is a great resource for anyone at any level of understanding, just to get a little clarity as to what it is you're looking into. So the way we get things left aligned and right aligned in the coding world is by using tables. So you can think of it just like an Excel table. It probably is the most relevant example, where you have table rows, right? And then you have table columns. The columns are represented a little differently in as far as the name of that value, but you're going to find it's very similar if you just think about it in that fashion. So if we take a look at what W3 Schools has to show us, you can see right here my example shows us that we have the table identifier, and it's in carets, and you can do a width parameter if you want there. But then you have something called TR, which is representative of table row. So again, I have my different table rows, 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And then you have the table data, which are your columns. Table data is, again, just like a column in Excel. And then you'll notice in this specific example, I have Jill Smith 50, and then I have Eve Jackson 94. And so each one of these are horizontally aligning that value while it's in that specific table row. Okay, so if you follow this and what it's saying, you can see that over here I have, in fact, in this case, and the way I know this is by using my little Firebug, which is another add-on that is free for you in Firefox. But you have your table row, and in fact, this is all, as you can see if I hover over the table row identifier, my whole form right now is in one table row. And I have two different table datas. One table data, I've included all three, first name, email, and phone. The other table data is just for the questions. And that's the back end of how I'm getting my alignment to look like that. If we look back at the W3 schools, one way that you can use to play around with it is the try it yourself will actually bring you to a screen and you can insert your code and it will display for you what it's making that code look like actually on the web browser. Komodo Edit will do the same thing. If you just save your file first, then you get this little globe icon and you can open the drop down and actually preview your code in the browser window. So if you want to go ahead and structure things, you can again do your little open caret and put a table identifier, close that little caret or the less than greater than signs there. Then you again start with a table row, and then your value inside of it is the table data. And if you want it to be in this fashion, then this is all one table data, inserted information. This is the other. And that's how you can get it to be aligned in that fashion. If you have questions about that, literally fill out the form below and we can get in touch and go through some of that. Now, looking back on this one, I don't need it horizontally aligned. I just left it as is, so I didn't need a table at all. What I did, however, need is to be able to edit that title. And by using our little Firebug here again, we can click on the cursor indicator, hover over that title, and see what I've done. So right here, this part is just identifying the title for me. I actually want to take a look at my div class, which is basically my kind of umbrella that my title falls within. And as I scroll down a little bit, I'll show you, this is actually what I did. So I have something, and this is actually a little bit different than HTML. As you can see, this is the HTML that we've been more working with for our webinar. But this is something a little different. It's called CSS, for those of you who don't know, which is a cascading style sheet. So as it indicates, it's style. It represents the look and the feel of what is on the page. And so whereas the HTML is more just the overall structure of what's on the page. So my actual title is represented just like we saw in HTML. You have an identifier for the values here, like first name, and it has an ID. In a similar way, if you think about it, the CSS represents the specific location it's affecting by a unique identifier called, in this case, this is a class. And so I'm affecting the class of title with my code here. And to be able to do this, if you already have a section specifically dedicated for CSS, you'll want to insert it there. But if you don't, you can actually do it still in your HTML code. You just have to put in a little section, and I would recommend running a Google search for CSS in HTML, and it should bring you to some information about this. But again, if you type in the word style, type, and you'll notice that Komodo is actually starting to fill in as I just start to do some of this. It fills the values in for me. So I now have my style section, and if I paste in what I had on the page, you can kind of see a little bit of a breakdown of what I'm talking about. So if I had a section in my code, this is obviously not the same code. So if I had a section called title, it's looking for that class, or in other words, that identifier called title, and then it's applying this. And again, if you run a Google search saying CSS text shadow, it'll display this for you. And this is just telling it how much to shadow below and to the right, and what color should be used for the shadowing. Again, I would recommend using some of the Google searches to get you some information about that. We won't be going and training you fully on how to code or anything in our webinar, so feel free to look at some of those online articles to get some insight. And if you have questions, feel free to let us know. Excuse me, but once you have that in place, you can obviously see it provides you a nice little shadow effect. No matter what format your text is in, it'll just simply shadow it for you in whatever color you indicate you want it to be in. It will provide you that benefit. Now, we've already gone over, again, a couple things. We've gone over how to take a form and make it an Infusionsoft form by adjusting the actions, ID, and name of the fields. We've talked about how to get the field labels inside of the actual input field, which is done by using the placeholder value and removing the label section of the HTML. We've also talked about how to set up tables and get it either horizontally aligned or, again, vertically and horizontally aligned, as we saw with the webinar Wednesday, where you have a little bit of both. And that's, again, done by having table rows and then table data to represent, again, the columns. And you can adjust accordingly and check out some online articles about that. Now, with that discussed, I'm going to go ahead and close some of these pages. Let's shift our attention to a bit of a step up from where we talked about last week. Last week, if you had the chance to see, talked about order forms and a few customization options, if you recall up here, to get additional fields onto the form. Now, maybe up here is where you want it, and if so, perfect. But there is the option to actually, as you can see, add fields to the billing information section right here. You can see right here I've got alternate email and I have a text box. Now, there's a couple other things that I'm not going to get very in-depth into, but you have the ability with someone who knows code and some help that you can actually change the look and the feel of not only just your standard forms online, but you can actually do the same thing to full-on order forms. You can change the design of them. You could change the way it's represented. You can even change on a web form, how it's set up on your site. So a couple of just more out-of-the-box examples that I've built I'm going to show you here. But again, we're not going to go into all the in-depth setup of how we did it. We'll talk about this case more. But I just want to be able to show you a few options for what is available and how Infusionsoft gives you a lot more flexibility than I believe you realize. You just simply have to know a little bit about what you're doing or know someone who does. So one thing is this specific setup is in fact an Infusionsoft order form. It's a payment authorization form for a certain company, and you can see I go through, I have some details, terms and conditions. You don't see the same tables that you have, obviously. You don't see the standard normal structure of an order form, but it's still processing an order. It's still collecting the information. It's just doing it in a different way. This form as well is an Infusionsoft order form. They have a lot more information going on. This is actually all in the background as a graphic. We have the overlaid videos here. We have the information about their product that they're offering. They have the order form, as you'll be familiar with, and then terms and conditions. And the submit button, place order button, is obviously a lot different than what you're probably familiar with. And so you do have a lot more options of what you can do. But again, letting us know if you have questions or things like that is certainly a good starting point in discussing possibilities for the project you have in mind. But don't be too discouraged or worry about, oh well, Infusionsoft's forms only provide this, so I'm at a roadblock and I can't get beyond it. There are alternative options of how you can get at what you want. It's just up to you if you would like to pursue that. And so how we get additional fields, not only just on the order form, but onto the certain billing information, for example, is if we go over to our e-commerce section, let's take a look at what we have in place for that. If we go under our checkout section, where the order form resides, and we're going to take a look at the specific form that we have in place. I apologize if you can hear anything in the background. There's, I believe, a worker outside making a little bit of noise, so I apologize about that. But go ahead, and if we go to our HTML section, I'm going to go ahead and just copy this code out, put it in Komodo so it's a little more clear to see. So this specific code is the way we're using JavaScript here, is another coding language, to be able to get the field to show up in the billing information spot. So you won't be able to really Google this to get the exact information that you're looking for. The code has certain libraries it's referencing to be able to pull in the specific functions that we have in place. This specific option actually requires a bit of customization for each field that you have in place, and probably a lot more advanced than anything that we've talked about so far. So just so you are aware, you absolutely can do this. This is obviously a lot more beginner friendly, I would say, but you do have the opportunity to do it through JavaScript. And as you can see on the screen, you have the various formatting here going through, but the way that JavaScript is set up includes functions, it includes variables represented. The styling and structure is different to an extent. And so if you like to jot this down, pause your screen, jot this down, whatever you want to do, go ahead. But I'm not going to get into it. I just wanted to show you the opportunity that you have as to how you can get a field to be in another table on your actual order form. So right now, that actually concludes our webinar today. There weren't a lot of questions. I don't know if it was maybe people on vacation or what there, but not a whole lot of questions concerning the order forms. But obviously, now that we have had the opportunity to discuss a couple of items, if any questions have been sparked, feel free to fill out the form below and get in touch and let us know. But otherwise, thanks again for watching, and look forward to meeting next week, and let us know if you have any questions in the meantime. Thanks again.